Hi guys, this is Chris Meyer, your high conflict divorce, custody, and domestic violence attorney for Greater Houston. I'm going on a little walk to the Sugarland Veterans Memorial Park to kind of clear my head and get a little bit of a workout in. But there's something I've really been wanting to share with everyone. It's a common thing that I see in many, like more than 95% of my cases. And I think if people could just address these 9 things, these 9 common addictions, then I think I would probably be out of business. And I'm not here to just, make a bunch of money off of people's family problems. I really do want to help people. I really do. And I try to help people fix their problems if I can. And so I want to talk about some of the 9 common addictions that I see that undermine the family relationship. Okay, but first, before I really go into that, I want to talk about what do these common addictions have in common. Well, for one, addiction, as it's commonly known, is something that we crave or we need to do in order to get a dopamine release in the brain. A lot of these addictions all stem from the body's need for dopamine. That's the chemical in the brain that's released by dopamine neurotransmitters that make us feel happy. This dopamine is released by these transmitters. It goes into a receptor where it's absorbed and makes us feel happy. Now, there's other things called GABA neurons that kind of block that, or not really block, but limit the body's ability to absorb. And when you take certain, like drugs, for example, it really affects the brain's ability to properly regulate the dopamine release, and it can turn into an addiction and very much undermine a marital relationship, a co-parenting relationship, any kind of social or family relationships you have can be in very much trouble with when there's addictions involved. And I see lots of addictions. So I'm gonna talk about 9 common addictions that I think if you could address, you or could talk to your loved one or a family member who has these problems, talk to them now, get them to address these issues so they don't turn into big issues later that will turn into like a divorce, for example, an expensive divorce, especially one involving children. And now all 9 of these addictions I'm about to talk about can all be traced back to the person's need to have a dopamine release. Now, there's other types of addictions out there, like working out or just having a healthy lifestyle or doing healthy activities, hiking, working out, whatever, going to the gym, having a nice hobby that all or playing with the puppy, playing with your kids. There's lots of things out there that make us happy, and that's a healthy way to get a dopamine release. And I don't think doing healthy things will or pose a danger to a relationship. So I'm just going to target the 9 things that will put a relationship in danger. Okay, so what I want to point out is, if we can do is find out who is addicted to these 9 things and raise awareness that the reason they're doing these things is because that's how they get their dopamine release, and maybe talk to them and counsel them and convince them to try to get their release a different way, a healthy way. For example, turn away from drugs to get your dopamine release and go, I don't know, new hobby, hiking, play with the puppy, play with your children, whatever makes you happy. So find another alternative way to get that same release that you need, just a healthy way. So let's talk about the The first, and this is a serious one, and I do see it from time to time. First one I want to talk about is gambling. Gambling is a Gambling can turn into an addiction, and for some people, that's the only way they will feel happy. That's how they get their dopamine release, by throwing away lots of money on online gambling or casinos or lotto, illegal game centers. I know those are getting raided by the sheriff's office all the time. That is a dangerous addiction that will guaranteed impact the family financially. And as we know, lots of people argue at home about money, and when one person has a gambling addiction, all it's going to do is aggravate that. So gambling is not my number one. It's not my top addiction, but it's my first addiction I'm talking about today. Okay. Next is drugs. And there are illegal drugs. There are legal drugs. You can go get opioids legally from a doctor. That doesn't mean you should. You can go get amphetamines from a doctor. That doesn't mean you should. And yeah, these things will release dopamine in the brain and make you feel happy, but it doesn't mean you should. Also, there's a lot of illegal drugs out there, like cocaine and heroin and things of that nature, methamphetamines. Now, these drugs will help facilitate the release of dopamine in the brain. Some of these drugs will, for example, like heroin, will frustrate the GABA neurons' ability to keep the neurotransmitters from overproducing and try to slow down some of that's getting absorbed into the brain through the receptors. Cocaine will hurt the brain's ability to mop up all that extra dopamine that's getting released and try to take it back in. So in amphetamines, just an explosion of dopamine release, just not good stuff. And I don't really want to get into the technical neuroscience of what each type of drug does, but what I will say, all of them have something in common: is it frustrates the brain's ability to regulate dopamine in a healthy way. So drugs is actually my number 2, because I'm going to get into my number 1 addiction later that I see that's hurting a lot of people. Okay, another addiction, number 3, is food. There's a lot of people are addicted to food. Let's face it. A lot of people will maybe get treated for alcohol or drugs, go to these treatment places and get fixed. They don't do drugs anymore. They don't do alcohol anymore. And the problem is they still need that dopamine release, so they just turn to something else. They eat a lot of food, and they become overweight. So yeah, they stopped doing the drugs and alcohol, which is good, but they just had to go somewhere else to get that release. So was the problem ever really fixed? That's a good question. So food, there's healthy foods, there's unhealthy foods. I think things that are low in sugar, a lot of greens, a lot of proteins, things like that would be a healthy option. Unhealthy foods, as we know, like fast food, things high in cholesterol, high in fat, high in sugar. Sugar is highly addictive, and that falls underneath my food category. So I think too much unhealthy food will cause complications, health complications later, which can have an impact on having a healthy relationship with family members. So yeah, I'm going to throw food in there. Okay. Next one is a big one, and it's alcohol. Alcohol is my number 1 addiction that I see in my cases. A lot of my cases deal with this. You really need to stay away from alcohol. It's back in the day, alcohol was really just seen as a moral failing and wasn't really recognized as an addiction. But in the last few decades, it's actually been recognized as an addiction. And it's for some people, it's very sad. And I see this in many of my cases. People get addicted to alcohol; they can't stop. It's their brain becomes hardwired. The neurons rewire, and the little synaptic endings in the brain rewire, and it can only be happy if they have their alcohol. There's no, and maybe I don't want to say once an addict, always an addict, but sometimes it's unfortunately true for some people. But yeah, it's hard to overcome that. So, and alcohol is such a common denominator in many of my cases. Now, if you're in a healthy relationship and alcohol is just not a problem, then maybe possibly this video is not for you. But if your relationship's in trouble and alcohol is a factor, my friend, I think you need to get rid of that stuff and find another way to be happy. I mean, I don't care. Go find a puppy. Find a puppy to go lick your face. Whatever you have to do, go get a new hobby. I don't care what it is. Alcohol is the number one and most dangerous thing in my cases that do affect the marriage relationship. Also, the ability to co-parent, the ability to just have any meaningful relationship. So alcohol is a big one, the biggest one. Okay, next is sex. Sometimes sex will get people into trouble. They have a sex addiction. Sex gives us a dopamine release. It makes us feel good, makes us feel happy. But the problem is if you're going about it the wrong way. If you're with your spouse, I would recommend only have sex with your spouse. If you're in a long-term dating relationship with somebody, only have sex with them. The problem is when maybe you're not getting that sex anymore, or you're not getting enough of it, and you need it to get that dopamine release, so you go find sex somewhere else. Now you just found out you got somebody else pregnant, and you're married. Now your girlfriend's pregnant, and she's want to have a baby, and you're married, and your wife finds out. And now it's turning into a big, expensive child support case, coupled with a divorce. Oh, it's just a financial nightmare. I wish you would have watched my video before. Okay, so that's sex. There's other addictions out there like coffee, and caffeine has been proven to be addictive. 85 to 90% of America drinks coffee. Over 50% of the users have some kind of withdrawal when they come off it, but I don't really see that type of addiction. Also, tobacco, I think it's a pretty gross addiction, but that's also an addiction, but it's not one of the, I don't really see like that type of addiction as a big threat to relationships as much. But moving on, I will talk about the internet. Internet, oh my gosh, internet, social media, internet porn. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't call it internet addiction. I should just call it digital addiction. That way we can also rope in video games. I know some people really just want to play video games all day, and it will really annoy and undermine the relationship. But I think the internet porn's a more serious one, which also goes back to the sex addiction, just the way you want to get your releases, your dopamine release. Also, oh my gosh, I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen cell phone screenshots from people who were on social media and flirting and sexting with others, or sexting, just sending nudes to each other. That's all. I guess that could be considered an addiction at some level, when you just can't stop using the internet. And I know some people, all they want to do is play on the internet and ignore their kids, and maybe the other spouse takes issue with that, so they don't like that either. So you got to be really careful. You need to learn how to put down the phone, get away from the laptop, whatever it takes to preserve your relationship. So that's internet addiction. Okay, another one, and this is, oh my gosh, such a serious, probably maybe my third most serious addiction, and that's the shopping addiction. Especially with online shopping, you can just buy something from your cell phone and get it on Amazon the next day. A lot of people out there buying things they don't need. Maybe the person who has the shopping problem isn't the breadwinner in the relationship, and the other spouse just feels like they're an ATM machine, and they're just tired of funding this. The bills aren't getting paid, overdraft fees for things, and for some dumb reason, the online shopping won't stop, and that's something that could stop, and it would kind of help stabilize the financial situation at home. So why do people do online shopping? Well, I mean, if you really want to trace it back, for a lot of people, the reason they do online shopping is because it makes them feel happy. Not just online shopping, just shopping in general. It makes them feel happy. That's how they get the dopamine release. And when they're not shopping, they feel depressed and they're sad. So they cope with depression by going shopping, make them happy, get that dopamine release. So you could argue that depression is, at some level, is the absence of dopamine release in the brain. So you're either shopping or you're depressed. Same thing with drugs. Maybe parents who are involved in the CPS system, they're told to get clean or they're not going to get their kids back. So, they go to court high, they argue with the judge. Well, that's not going to go well so they are using and they're failing their drug test. Or they just stop using drugs altogether and then they're depressed. They go into a depressive period and they're just too depressed to get out of bed to show up to the hearings. Now, that's another reason they're not showing up to the services, so they're just not going to win. They're not. They could use drugs to feel good, so they go to do their services, and then they fail their drug tests, or they do the right thing and stop using drugs, and then they don't show up to the services because they're just too crippled from their depression to get out of bed. So it's just a downward spiral, and I'm not defending people who use drugs at all. I'm just illustrating a point that the whole thing is a downward spiral. Okay, so I think the depression is a factor, and the way you kind of get out of the depression would be through finding ways to get that dopamine release. And some people do online shopping, sex, things like that. Okay. Now, that's really it. Those were my 9 things that I wanted to talk about. I want to thank you for joining me today. I think if people really understood why we need these 9 addictions in our lives, the why would be the dopamine. And if we can find a healthy alternative way to get that release, then we could be much healthier and happier relationships. And people wouldn't need to hire people like me, like family law attorneys, to help them get out of a bad relationship. Now, the other problem is if the spouse who has these issues just won't acknowledge it, then, like they say, you can there's that folk wisdom out there. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. You can try to get somebody help, but if they're just not going to accept it, then, I don't know. You have to make a decision. I'm not going to recommend that it's okay to stay in an abusive relationship. But, at the same time, it's important for people to acknowledge. And if you're watching this video and you are struggling with that, maybe 1 or 2 of these addictions at a serious level, but some of the other addictions at a lower level, if you could just address the dopamine issue, then maybe all of it would go away and just be able to lead a higher quality life. Well, anyways, thank you for joining me from beautiful Sugar Land Memorial Park. It's a beautiful hot day, and I'm under the shade to keep my bald head from getting sunburned. So thank you for joining me. My name is Chris Marr. Thank you. Bye-bye.